Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State! Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host tonight, Nick Pollock, and I am glad to be back. It has been quite a while for me, but not for my co-host. He's been on here quite a lot lately, and that's Mr. Matt Filipovitz. Matt, how you doing?
Nick, I have a lot of free time right now, just by nature of my work schedule, and it's been lovely to record a lot of podcasts, but I'm excited to be back with you. I'm glad that you powered through your Rose Bowl trip. It looked like a great time. I'm very jealous you got to go.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. You know, unfortunately, myself and Matt DeBear and everyone else we know that were there all were dealt a cold in the aftermath as a result. But, you know, I guess that's what happens when you stand out in the rain for however many hours it actually ended up raining. But yes, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. I didn't go back in 2016 and I wasn't a Penn State fan prior. So really happy that I went. And I'm a proponent of the 12-team playoff, so I don't mind the fact that the Rose Bowl will be just a playoff game going forward. But it was pretty cool to be able to go to the last, quote unquote, true Rose Bowl. That's something that I'm grateful that I got to do before it turns into just playoff mode here. But yeah, it was a blast. We got to do Disneyland and stuff while we were there too, so it was a lot of fun.
Nice. I watched it at a bar and I got wings at halftime, and then they blew up at halftime. So that was fun. I like to think those two things were correlated.
I know you've talked about this before. What's the Penn State bar scene like in Chicago?
So it's really good. There's a couple of ones that were like sponsored by the Alumni Association that were a good time. I went to one for Wisconsin 2021, where I got to meet friend of the show Ankit, which was a lot of fun. And it was 11 a.m. local time kick. So I had a Bloody Mary during the game. So that was actually that was like a fun brunch kind of day. But I go to Durno's now, in Lincoln Park in Chicago. So if you're in Chicago next year for Penn State football, come to Durno's. It was a great time. Not a sponsor, but they could be.
As always, for whatever reason, we have a lot of Seattle listeners to the podcast. If you're listening to this and you're a Penn State fan in Seattle, let me know where you watch the game, because I've yet to find some place that I truly enjoy watching it out here, aside from, my own couch. But that's a whole nother thing. So before we dive into this, into our show here today, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast wherever you are listening to it right now. If you have the chance, leave us a review on iTunes. Make sure that is it even called iTunes anymore? I guess it's Apple Podcasts. Yeah. And please make sure you also subscribe on YouTube as well if you would like to see our faces, or if you really don't want to see our faces, then don't. It's an optional thing for you. But if you are interested, we get a lot of opposing fans chiming in on the YouTube comments, and it's pretty fun to talk with them and interact with them. So if that's something you'd be interested in, and it's far less toxic than Twitter, so that's a plus.
What a low standard.
But I know, it's ridiculous. So, Matt, we are here today to talk about the guys on the Penn State roster that are choosing to spurn the option to head to the NFL this upcoming NFL draft, and instead are staying in Happy Valley for at least one more season. And real quick, if you're interested in hearing more about the early enrollees for the class of 2023, make sure you go back and listen to the podcast that was just posted on Wednesday, January 11th. Matt and Bill broke those guys down. But instead of talking about guys that are brand new to the program, Matt, today we're going to talk about those guys that are staying around for yet another year. We have talked about some of them already here and there, but we're just going to kind of do an all-comprehensive list here. And just, for anyone listening, we're not going to talk about guys that we are maybe surprised didn't enter the transfer portal. We're just going to focus on those guys that, really had a legitimate NFL decision to make here. So, Matt, let's start off with Olu Fashanu. And we're not going to go too deeply into him here because we've already talked about him a bit, but probably the biggest surprise out of everybody Penn State could have entered in, or anybody from Penn State that could have entered the draft this year, for the sole reason that, there's Peters, I don't know how to say his last name, Skoronski from Northwestern. There's Paris Johnson from Ohio State. Those are pretty much the top two tackles on the board, it seems like. And Olu Fashanu probably had a pretty decent chance to go ahead of either one of them, and very easily could have been top 10, maybe even a top 5 type pick. So obviously as a Penn State fan, like we're very happy he's back, but a little surprising, I think.
Yeah. So the draft deadline has now passed, so you cannot enter your name into the NFL draft pool any longer. So the guys that are here are the guys that are here, barring transfer. So Olu is the biggest one. I am not that surprised he opted to stay, just because he literally just turned 20 years old, and it's got to be hard to be 20 years old in the NFL. Like, he's such a young player for his quote unquote grade, if you want to call it that, in college. So for him to come back, I think just to gain another year of experience, this was a 3-star kid, what we thought would be a developmental project, and it feels like he really just put it all together really quickly. And there's not a ton of game tape on him, which I think makes him a bit of an unknown to NFL teams, and that can be a pro and a con. Like, you look at like Trey Lance, who the Niners took a couple years back. There was next to no game tape on him, but the Niners still felt he was worth a top 5 pick just because of his intangibles. And I think Olu could have easily have gone that route, but for him to come back, refine his craft a little bit more, is just huge for Penn State. It's huge for Drew Aller. It's huge for Phil Troutwine. Like, this offensive line in 2023 has a chance to be, I will go beyond good, and I will say it has a chance to be great. And that's a huge jump, and I do not make that statement lightly. And Olu Fashanu is the main reason why I feel like I can say that now.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it has a chance. And this year's line was pretty good for the most part. They had some lapses, but you're right. Next year's line looks like it could be amazing. And we're going to talk about a couple other guys in that group as well. But real quick, Matt, before I continue, because I forgot to mention at the top, with each of these guys, we're going to talk about what their role is going to be ahead of next season, or what we think their role is going to be. We're also going to talk about how it affects, their position room at large. For Olu Fashanu, it's pretty simple. He's the starting left tackle, one of the best starting left tackles in college football. As far as what it means for the room, the only thing that is really interesting here, I think, is talking about Drew Shelton. Yep. Because now there's a decision that the staff needs to make, especially given that he's burned his red shirt. Not that he couldn't, end up taking a red shirt next year as a result, but there's an interesting decision as far as, do you keep him behind Fashanu at left tackle, continue to just develop him as the heir apparent, assuming that Fashanu is gone after next season, he can step in the year after and take over? Or do you start working him over on the right side and see if he can be your right tackle as soon as next season? What do you think?
I think they're going to move him to right tackle. I think it's very rare that a guy plays as a true freshman and then goes on to redshirt the following year. Like, that only happens if an injury happens. And the reason I think right tackle is going to be where he has to end up is because Bryce Effner is stepping away from the game of football after 5 really great years as part of this program. And now Caden Wallace has to deal with maybe a platoon again, which is totally fine. So I think that in order to get the most out of your right tackle spot, you need to have a lot of competition there. And that's where I think Shelton's going to have a lot of value in pushing guys like Caden Wallace and Jimmy Christ and those guys on the outside.
And I think something else too, James Franklin has talked in the past before about doing whatever he can do from his side of things to, obviously number one is winning football games at Penn State, but also making sure that he can make his players as attractive to NFL teams as possible. I know we heard him talk about that back with Will Fries, I believe is when that conversation really happened. He talked about getting Fries time in multiple spots to improve his NFL profile. And Shelton's a really talented guy. Even if he does end up going back to left tackle after Fashanu leaves, having the ability to play on the right side is not at all a detriment, because you don't know where a future NFL team is going to want him. So it's not a bad thing. Definitely.
There's no such thing as too much tape at too many positions.
Right. Yeah. So as we continue on our list here, we're going to hit like kind of the big names first, and the guys that we think are going to be most impactful for the 2023 Penn State Nittany Lions. And after Fashanu, there's 2 other big names that are potential top 2 round guys, and this one's kind of tricky because of the position he plays. But Curtis Jacobs, in one of the more simplistic ways to announce that you'll be returning, a simple graphic that says "I'm back," which I love. I thought it was great. But he has announced that he will also be returning next year to Penn State. One that we probably assumed would be the case. We thought he'd be back, but there was definitely a question. Really talented kid. Tape, I would say this past season was a bit uneven early on when he was playing mostly the will linebacker. I wouldn't say he really stood out much. And that is the one linebacker position where I'd say you do really stand out if if you got the juice, you're going to stand out there. But once he moved back to the Sam linebacker spot, when Abdul Carter started emerging, then we saw Jacobs really take off. And of course, that's where he played the year before when Brandon Smith was manning the will. So I think this is it. For Manny Diaz to get another year of Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter together is, he's got to be excited about that.
Yeah, this one's huge. I mean, think about what we were thinking about this Penn State linebacker room, this time last year. There were so many unknowns, there were so many question marks. And now I'd go as far as to say linebacker is the position on the defense I'm most confident in that can be productive. And you're right, Jacobs did kind of look lost at the will to start the year. I do appreciate that they held Abdul Carter's hand a little bit. I think that was the smart thing to do, especially for a guy who has to take on a really physical role as that linebacker. But once it was clear he was ready, moving Jacobs back to Sam, where he dominated against a lot of really physical run-heavy teams. And it's a bummer they didn't have that for Michigan. Like, that wasn't the plan at that point. So I think that game could have been at least closer. But after the Rose Bowl performance Jacobs just had, where he had 2 sacks, in the biggest game of the year for Penn State, the biggest win of the year, to be sure, is just
against a very elusive quarterback.
Yeah, granted, the backup came in, wasn't the same guy, but still,
right. For the second one, yeah.
Utah's offensive line is no slouch. That's a good unit. So Jacobs coming back, I think, really, really skyrockets the floor of this defense. He's a bit of a tweener, I think, for the NFL. So I think the more good tape he has, it's only going to help his stock. I mean, he's a guy, he was going to be a true senior anyway. Like, this year was the first year he was eligible to leave. And I think he'll really benefit greatly from that 4th year on campus. And I'm excited to see him take what I think is going to be a big step forward in 2023.
Yeah, so his role is very clear. Like, he's going to stay at the same linebacker. Yep. But I think there is an interesting question to ask as far as, when Penn State goes into 2 linebacker sets. Do you think this offseason they work to make sure that when they do go 2 linebackers, instead of Carter and insert middle linebacker here, or Jacobs and insert middle linebacker here, do you think that they spend a lot of time this offseason working to make sure that those 2 linebacker sets are Jacobs and Carter?
I think they have to. I mean, keep your best 11 on the field. I mean, the 4-2-5 is realistically another really good shot to be the base set next year, just with how talented this Penn State secondary is setting up to be. So if you can go out there, you can have your 4 down linemen, you can have a game wrecker like Abdul Carter, who you can just send after the quarterback, and you can send Jacobs, a guy who was more or less a safety at the high school level and still has those coverage skills, out there to drop. I think that's going to be a phenomenal place to be, especially on, those 3rd and long packages where Penn State, let's be honest, it was feast or famine for them in those situations in 2022. They either got a pick, felt like got a big sack, or they were burned by, a running quarterback scampering out of there and getting just enough yards. So if they can go out there and they can keep those 2 on the field more, it's only going to help this defense in the long run.
And as far as how it affects the rest of the room, I'd say minimally, right? It's not like there were any other young linebackers aside from Abdul Carter really breaking down the door this year. So if anything, I think it's a good thing for the room overall, aside from just, having Curtis Jacobs, who's a phenomenal talent. It gives, the Jamari Buttons and the Tony Rojas's and the Keon Wileys and all those guys just more time to continue developing, learning, growing, all that good stuff. Any other effects in the room that you see there?
Best linebacker room in the Big Ten. Penn State's.
I'm not inclined to disagree with you. I would have to dive a bit deeper into some of the other teams, but when you have Jacobs and Abdul Carter, I think it's kind of hard to argue that
and
point.
With Kobe King, I know your boy Kobe King with his emergence too. I think
love Kobe
It's going to be a really fun room.
I do love me some Kobe King. I think he's going to have a big year next year. The third name on our most impactful section here of the returners is defensive end Adisa Isaac, who posted a more traditional "I'm returning" post with all glory to God and thank you to all these people and blah, blah, blah. I like the simplistic approach better, but so be it. Adisa Isaac, somebody that I think there's probably a good portion of Penn State fans that were surprised that he even had the chance to enter the NFL draft this year, just because he missed the entire season and we just lost a lot of time with him. But between he and Chop Robinson, it's pretty similar to Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs. It's just, with Isaac now returning, it's yet another duo on the defense that is just extremely, extremely talented and could be a game changer for Manny Diaz once again.
Yeah, with Tarburton declining to take that 6th year, Isaacs, came underneath kind of a microscope because the prospects of that position room hinged on his decision. And I think he made a good one. I think it's really hard to be productive your first year back from that kind of injury. And I think a year of going through the full offseason workouts, the full conditioning, another year in this system. I mean, Adisa Isaac is a freak of an athlete. He's the kind of guy who the staff was able to drop back in coverage a lot of the time, which is just a really unique look. And you've got to be a good athlete to be a defensive end and have the ability to drop back. Like, there's very few guys that can do it well. So Isaac's strength is always going to be his speed. So I think him getting a little bit more of that back, again, it was an Achilles injury. I think we're all fairly confident saying. So that's a hard one to build strength back up in that part of your body. So I'm excited to see him go back out there, regroup after a year back on the field. He's mentally ready again, and I want to see him go out there and become a really dominant speed edge rusher, kind of like what we saw Shaka Toney be. I think that's a realistic and attainable goal. And I mean, the floor of that room is now elevated a ton between Adisa Isaac coming back and with Zariah Fisher and Smith Vilbert both hopefully being available in 2023. It's going to be another really fun room, and just kudos to John Scott Jr. for building that up.
Yeah, and even with Isaac coming back from injury, you could tell too, like every week he just looked a little more comfortable, a little bit faster. I thought he looked incredible in the Rose Bowl. You could just tell every single snap he looked more and more comfortable, more, closer and closer back to what he really can be. So it's really exciting to have him back as well.
I thought he was going to go. Of all these guys, I thought he was going to go because he was a game captain for the Rose Bowl. And everybody else who was a game captain was a 6th-year guy or a 5th-year guy who ran out of eligibility. I was really surprised to see him come back after I saw him be named a game captain.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, maybe the plan, maybe it changed. Maybe he was leaning to go, or, I mean, it's also possible it's just some kind of like practice player of the week type thing, gets you the captainship for the game. So we don't really know that, but he is a remarkable talent. Someone that you mentioned, John Scott Jr. has done a great job with him, especially coming off the injury, being able to work him back in positive ways. And the Shaka Toney comparison's an interesting one. I feel like I see it as kind of the halfway point between Shaka Toney and Yetur Gross-Matos, because he has, Adisa Isaac has great size. I don't think he has the ability to flex inside the way that Yetur Gross-Matos did, and he might not be quite as fast as Shaka Toney or explosive off the edge, but the middle point there is, it's still a really, really great player that's really versatile and can, defend the pass and the run. And it's just going to keep improving his NFL profile as well. He could easily be a top 2-round guy with another big year on tape for sure.
I think he's a guy who that's a really good, place to compare him to, halfway between YGM and between Shaka. I think that's a really fair comparison.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's talk about home field apparel.
Let's do it.
As I was at the Rose Bowl, I was on the lookout for any home field gear I could find. Now, because of the rain, it gets a little tricky because, people are putting on raincoats and ponchos and stuff. And so it's a little harder to spot, but I did spy a couple. I was wearing a home field shirt, but it was under a 14 jersey, which I wore for Cliff. But I did see some out there. So that was encouraging. I looked for the RLR gear as well. Didn't see any. But again, it wasn't like necessarily a warm day. So a lot of sweatshirts and all that stuff. But I haven't talked to you since before the holidays, I don't think. Did you get any home field stuff for Christmas, or did you give any home field stuff?
I did not get any, but I gave home field. Friend of the blog, LOL. Friend of the pod. Throwback. Friend of the pod, Stanley, I know got home field for his beloved friends and family, and that was on a recommendation from me. So I gave a little bit of an assist there, I think.
Yeah, I gave my mom one t-shirt, and I think I got my dad a sweatshirt also. That might have been from somewhere else, but you know, home field apparel, awesome Christmas gift. It's an awesome anytime gift, or just, you know, splurge purchase or whatever. But we've talked about them before. Unbeatable quality, unbeatable just ideas and designs. I'm not a Georgia fan, obviously, but I saw the Georgia National Championship shirt that they just put out, and I love it. Like, it's a beautiful shirt. But you know, we've raved on and on about Home Field. They're a great sponsor. We love working with them. They make amazing stuff that is designed, you know, truly as if it was somebody who spent 30 years analyzing your school's history and deciding the perfect shirt to make. If you've never ordered from Home Field before, let's say maybe you got some extra money throw around after Christmas, you know, maybe you had to return something, you got a gift card to spend or something. Why don't you go ahead and throw that money at Home Field Apparel, where if you put in your first order, you can use the code ROAR Lions, ROAR, all caps, all one word, for 15% off at checkout. That can be for any Penn State shirts or sweatshirts. It could be for any school stuff. I have some Wazoo stuff. Matt, you've got stuff for 100 different schools. Yep. It is well worth the time. It is a fantastic company, fantastic people. They make great apparel. We love working with them. Check out Home Field Apparel. Use the code ROARLINES or checkout for 15% off, and you will not be upset that you did. Now, Matt, let's dive back into our returners. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other guys here that realistically could have gone to the NFL. Now, these are guys that probably would not have been high selections. We're probably talking about day 3 guys here at this point, maybe some sneaking into day 2. But while they may not have gone as high in the NFL draft, their presence on the Penn State roster in 2023 is going to be really important in all of these cases, and it's great to see them back. And let's start with defensive tackle Devon Ellies.
This is a big one.
Now,
this is a big one.
This is a big one because PJ Mustipher finally out of eligibility. We're going to miss PJ dearly, but he will be off to the NFL now after a fantastic Penn State career, and one that, you know, was really important for kind of rebuilding or strengthening, let's say, the McDonough to Penn State line that has yielded some really important players, including Curtis Jacobs since then. So love PJ. I'm sure when we get close to the draft, we'll do a whole podcast love letter to him. But for now, let's talk about Ellies, because he seems like the most natural guy to step up and replace Mustipher in the lineup. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I think he's absolutely maybe the most important defensive tackle for Penn State going into 2023.
And while he wasn't playing, you know, he wasn't playing necessarily starter snaps this year, but I feel like he took a really tangible step forward in his development. I was really impressed with what I saw from Ellies this year.
Yeah, and I think the biggest reason he's on this list for us is because he walked at senior day. So I thought that was kind of a sign that he was heading out the door, even though he has even non-COVID eligibility left. He has 2 years if he takes advantage of the COVID year. So I thought he was going to go. But you're right. He took on a bigger role, I think, as they tried to take some stuff off of PJ's plate. I think after he got hurt in 2021, it just became clear that that volume of snaps was unrealistic for a second straight year. So Ellie stepped up in a big way, I thought, and especially those early games when Keziah Izzard was also out. And I think that I noticed when Ellie's made splash plays. I think maybe it's because he celebrates really enthusiastically. I don't know why. I remember Ellie's when he would get by guards and centers and bring down people behind the line of scrimmage. I remember those plays. And that's a great place to exist in. If you're a splash player kind of guy in your limited role, I'm willing to bet you can match that as a starter. So Penn State is very small at defensive tackle right now, with Hakeem Beamon and Keziah Izzard being the 2 other most experienced guys in that room. And Franklin said they have to get bigger. Devon Ellies is the kind of guy who can make you bigger along the interior. So I'm really curious to see what his role looks like, and I'm so happy he's getting a chance to start.
Yeah, I would expect him to be probably one of the leading snap getters at defensive tackle, I would think, unless, you know, somebody else takes a big step forward that we're not, you know, necessarily predicting. But yeah, I thought he was really great this season. I think that he is, like you said, he plays an important role. He's a big body on the interior that they really need between Beamon and, you know, guys like Zane Durant, who are really quick and have really bright futures in the interior, but they just don't have that size. So yeah, Ellies plays an important role here. And I know he walked at senior day, but prior to that, I wouldn't say we were expecting him to go.
No way.
So all of a sudden, Yeah, all of a sudden his return, like you said, became big news because he just brings a different element to that room than they have. And had he been gone, they would probably be much deeper into the defensive tackle portion of the transfer portal right now because it would be a sore need at this point. So awesome to have him back for
Yeah, he
sure.
logged 15 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. So for an interior guy who didn't play starters reps, those are pretty good numbers.
Yeah, that's great. Let's keep it in the trenches, but let's flip to the other side of the football. Somebody else that we've talked about briefly already because he announced, I think, pretty much right after the Michigan State game, but that's presumed center next year, Hunter Norzad. Again, not somebody that I'd probably someone we didn't really have a great feel for either way as far as NFL or coming back, just because he was a transfer. We just didn't, he hadn't been in Happy Valley for too long, but somebody who I thought played pretty well this year and somebody that I expect to do quite well in the center with the center job next year, assuming he does win it. Not saying he'll necessarily be as good as G Scruggs was. I think Scruggs was phenomenal this year, but I feel pretty comfortable with Norzad presumably taking the reins for that job next year.
Yeah, it's going to be his 6th season, or I guess 6th year. The Ivy League didn't play in 2020, so call it how you will. It's a bonus year of eligibility he's taking advantage of, and I really liked what he gave them at guard this year. I thought he was the really good complement to Landon Tengwall to start things off, and then when he had to start, I didn't notice him a lot of the time, which is always what you want to see out of your left guard. Like the one time I did, I think, was him pulling against Ohio State, where he just mauled a guy on the outside. That was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and him going over to center, I think, is big. I think you want your experience and your leadership, in the middle of your offensive line, the most important cog, the guy who touches the football in every single play, and the leader of that unit. So he's a guy I think can match Scruggs's production. But even if he takes even a small step back, the guys around him are so talented that I think he's the kind of guy who can perform at third team honorable mention all Big Ten level. And there's been very few offensive linemen we've seen, be able to achieve that. So I have high hopes for the 6th year senior and the Cornell transfer.
Yeah. And as far as how it affects the room, again, minimally,
Mm-hmm.
I think that without him, it probably would have been maybe Nick Dawkins at center next year.
I'm curious if they would have tried Vega there. I'm curious if they would have done some shuffling there, just
That's a
because
thought.
Sal
Yeah.
Wormley, Vega, Landon Tengwall, JB Nelson are all interior guys. I'm curious if they would have shuffled around one of those guys before, with Dawkins being hurt for the majority of this year too.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe even like Alex Birchmeyer gets a look there potentially as a true freshman. Yeah. But either way, very happy to have Norzad back. On the other end, well, not other end, from the middle to the other end of the line, we talked about Olu Fashanu. Also returning next year will be potential right tackle Caden Wallace. Wallace is an interesting one, mostly because his play was, I'd say, quite uneven in 2022. He won the right tackle job out of camp. Comes in, came to Penn State with high pedigree. I believe he was like a 9600, somewhere around there on the 247 composite. So, came in with hype, was one of their higher rated offensive linemen ever as a recruit, but just hasn't quite put it all together yet. There's still, theoretically the option of him going back to guard, but he's so big that you look at him, you see a tackle. So definitely questions there. And I don't think he'll be handed the right tackle job by any means. I think he's going to be competing with Drew Shelton. He'll be competing. They've talked about how they're going to start Birchmeyer and Javen Williams on the outside, so they could even enter their names in the conversation if they, get off to a fast start. So this is an interesting one to me. But honestly, I was probably thinking Wallace was more of a portal candidate than an NFL guy. But when you have the size he does and the pedigree he does, it's not hard. Like he would have latched on somewhere in the NFL, probably in a practice squad. But I think someone would have taken a chance on him.
I think there is still a damn good ball player in Caden Wallace. Like I think there's still a guy who can live up to that potential. He's struggled at right tackle. Like this will be his 4th year as a starter, and it feels like he's been decent his entire career. And that's not what you want, but you'll take it, especially for what the Penn State offensive line has been for the last decade. I think with this level of competition in the room now, I think it's going to be really freaking hard to not be borderline dominant and keep that right tackle job. And I think Caden Wallace is up to that challenge. I mean, he mostly struggled early. I think he settled in nicely late, and then he got hurt. And then he did return for the Rose Bowl in a limited capacity. And I just want to see him fend off Drew Shelton. I think Javen Williams is going to be a swing guy no matter what. I think Birchmeier is going to eventually go over to guard. So really, it's between Caden Wallace and Drew Shelton for this right tackle job. And right now, personally, I think I would have to give Drew Shelton the edge, but that doesn't mean I don't think Caden Wallace can go out there, figure it out, have it all click, and get the lion's share of the reps. I think it's going to be a platoon no matter how you slice it, just because I think Shelton's that good. But I think Wallace is really going to elevate his play and become a pretty solid right tackle for Penn State moving forward.
He's like you said, he certainly has the ability to do so. Tons of raw talent. It's like you said, you hope that this ends up being a situation where the competition elevates the play and that he's able to rise up to that. And like you said, it's probably going to stay a platoon situation no matter what, but that doesn't mean it can't be a platoon of two really good, high performing players. And like you said, thought he did improve as the year went on. Definitely did not look great at the beginning of the season, but like he has all the talent in the world, and there's no reason to think that he can't continue to build on it and have a huge last season in Happy Valley. Two more guys we're going to talk about here, Matt. One on the offensive side, one on the defensive side. And let's stay on the offensive side here, very similar to the offensive line. Let's talk about tight end Theo Johnson. Another name that maybe most Penn State fans were not necessarily expecting to go to the NFL. I know we weren't, but somebody with insane pass catching ability, great size, great speed for the position. And with the way the tight end position in the NFL is evolving, I think had he decided to go to the NFL, he certainly would have found somewhere. I don't know that he would have been higher than a day 3 pick,
but he would have been a day 3 pick.
His profile is one of an NFL tight end, even if the production so far collegiately doesn't necessarily line up with that. But for Penn State, especially with Brenton Strange off to the NFL, not that this is a room hurting for depth. It's not, and they're bringing in multiple freshmen who could contribute as early as this year as well. But Theo Johnson is the unquestioned lead dog in this room when it comes to the big-time receiving threats from the tight end position, which is something that we saw Mike Yurcich's offense in. Oh, boy, that was a rough sentence.
Welcome
which
back,
we
Nick.
saw. Which we saw in Mike Yurcich's offense evolve as the season went on. We saw them get more and more involved with the play calling and be targeted more and more often downfield. So getting him back is huge, especially for a first-year quarterback.
I think,
or a first-year starter. Excuse me.
I think it's maybe I'll float this take out to you. Let me see what you think. Is Theo Johnson a tight end in name only?
So, are you asking me? It's like, is he Jimmy Graham on the Saints?
Is he a glorified? Have you think about?
No,
okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think he's, we have seen Theo Johnson block. Like, I don't think he's a bad blocker. Right. I think he's shown some pretty good things in that department. He just doesn't get asked to do it a whole lot. Whereas, guys like Jimmy Graham and, what's another one, like Kyle Pitts, like they don't get asked to block and they're not particularly good at it either. I don't think he's quite that far in that direction.
Okay. That's fair. He does block pretty well when they go with the T formation. So that's a fair response to that. I guess my point is, when you think about the way Penn State lines up their receivers, whether that be most notably to me, the stack, when they come out in the stack formation, Johnson is always split out wide. And Warren's done that sometimes. Strange has done that sometimes, but Johnson is the primary guy to do that. And that's really rare for a tight end to be your outside threat. And that's where I think Johnson's going to have a lot of value. This receiver room is unproven and it's thin on experienced players. Like there's, I think, 11 scholarship guys at time of recording. And I think Johnson is kind of like 11 and a half for those receivers. And I think he's going to be a big security blanket for Drew Aller. I think he's going to put up phenomenal numbers at the tight end position for Penn State this year. And I would go as far to say he is the most important pass catcher for Penn State in 2023. I don't think that's overstepping anything. And, he could have gone pro. I think he would have been a surefire day 3 pick. I think he's going to test really well when that time comes, but I think he can put up some really crazy numbers in this offense next year, and I'm excited to see how his role evolves without Brenton Strange there anymore. And it's great because even with him coming back, that doesn't mean, we're going to see less of Tyler Warren or that Jerry Cross or Khalil Dinkins or Joey Schlafer or Andrew Rappleyea can't all go out there and get minutes as well. I think Johnson is just a very unique talent and very important for Drew Aller in this passing game.
I'm not sure I would go so far to say he's the most important. I think that distinction probably belongs to Keandre Lambert-Smith, but I wouldn't argue. I love Keandre.
What was your reaction to his touchdown in the Rose Bowl, by the way? Not to get off topic, but were you going insane?
Oh man, I just pure elation. Like I feel like I noticed the play happening pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Like I saw him gain that separation right away, and I you could tell the touchdown was coming from a mile away just because of the way the play played out. But I was very, very happy. That was a lot of fun to see. I will remain on the KLS train until such a day that he is no longer on the Penn State roster. So very, very much my jam there. But yeah, I to your point about, to go back to that Theo Johnson question, whether he's really tight end or not, I think these days it's more like, is your tight end, do you treat your tight end like a tight end fullback hybrid or a tight end receiver hybrid? Like, I don't think there's any like true, like I would maybe George Kittle like might be the only like actual like tight end as defined by the previous however many years of football. But I definitely agree that he's going to be a hugely, hugely important piece to the passing game. I wouldn't be surprised if he was. I mean, I think saying top 3 in targets is, about as safe as I can get. He might even end up top 2 in targets in the end. Like I could see a scenario playing out where that happens.
Oh yeah,
depending on what happens with the wide receiver transfer portal. We'll see there. But I am probably more excited about. Man, I know I put Theo in the second group here. I probably could have very easily put Theo Johnson in the first group as far as guys I'm most excited about returning. Yep. I just didn't because the path to the NFL wasn't quite as clear. Where those other guys were top selections, but this is huge for Penn State's offense. Like you said, getting him back is absolutely massive, especially as a security blanket for Drew Aller, who will be in his first year as a starter, or so we think. Last guy, Matt, let's flip it over to the defensive side of the football. And this is another one where not necessarily somebody that we were expecting to see go, but somebody that could have. And I thought despite being the least hyped of the 3 guys at his position that we'll mention here in a moment, put just as good of things on tape, I think, as the other 2, and that's cornerback Johnny Dixon. Obviously, Joey Porter Jr. gets, the lion's share of the hype, and he's most likely going to be a first-round pick. He should. He was fantastic this year. Going to miss him dearly. Kalen King, Pro Football Focus darling, Kalen King, has also done incredible.
Pro Football Focus National Championship.
Oh boy, we don't even have time for that. But yeah, Kalen King had an outstanding year, capped by a phenomenal Rose Bowl performance as well. Beautiful interception, but he was fantastic this year. But Johnny Dixon was, I would say, equally as good as the other 2, honestly. And I think he was more versatile than the other 2 because they would send him on cornerback blitzes. He had that basically the game sealing sack against Purdue in week 1. He was outstanding this year. And, he is going to be, again, one of the top 3 corners next year. He should be the starter along with Kalen King. Who knows with Storm Duck coming in, but either way, he's going to be part of a triumvirate of high-end cornerbacks again. And he's the unsung hero of this room by far.
Yeah, he's a guy who, again, I think you and I both probably think day 3 is most realistic, but he is out of natural. That's a horrible way to word that. Traditional eligibility he's out of because he played in 2019 as a true freshman for South Carolina. So now this will be his 5th season. And he's a guy who I totally forgot about that, Nick. There was that weird stretch in September where Johnny Dixon was the only player who could sack a quarterback. Do you remember that? That really weird phase
I
where
do. Yeah.
it was just, let's bring Johnny Dixon on a corner blitz, and it just kept working. I totally forgot about it.
Wasn't there a point where the team lead in sacks was a tie between Denai Dennis Sutton, who got like 2-on-1 drive in garbage time, and Johnny Dixon?
So Johnny Dixon finished with 3 total sacks. I think they all came in like September. So I totally forgot about that. I'm glad you mentioned that. But yeah, Dixon's a really unique guy in that, you're right, he was the third dog in this pack. He was the kind of forgotten guy because Porter, obviously, just name recognition, his own play. He was just a guy that the media and everybody kind of fell in love with. Kalen King, I think, is the best natural corner in the Big Ten. I think he's a better natural corner than Joey Porter Jr. I think Porter might be a better football player because he's so physical and so imposing. But like naturally as like a tactician, I think it's King. But Dixon went out there and he played really well once Porter went out with appendicitis. And that's a really talented room because you have Kalen King, Johnny Dixon are your starters. Storm Duck's going to get a ton of run. Daquan Hardy, your boy, is still in there. Cam Miller, the freshman they brought in. Dixon's going to have to play at a really high level, and I think he really set the stage for that with his closing to the 2022 campaign. So I don't think it's going to get any easier for quarterbacks to throw in this Penn State secondary, and a big reason for that is Johnny Dixon. That might be one of the better transfer portal finds of this like era. I don't know how much longer it's going to be the Wild West like this, but to find a guy that young in his career still, he came to Penn State with 3 years of eligibility left, and he's been a good player for at least 2 of those. And I think he's going to go out there and be a great one for his 3rd year.
Yeah, he's been, it's hard to really crown a best transfer because Penn State has done really, really well in the transfer portal.
Stout, by the way, for best transfer.
Oh, there's a lot that you got. Jordan Stout, you got Arnold Ebiketie, you got Derek Tangelo, you have Johnny Dixon, you have I was just thinking of somebody else just on the tip of my tongue.
Position.
Oh boy. Mitchell Tinsley. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of candidates there, but and I think Riley Thompson, new punter, I think he could eventually add himself to that list also, along with Jordan Stout.
Can I ask you something about that punter real quick?
Sure.
He was a freshman All-American last year, correct?
Mm-hmm.
He's a senior now this year.
Is that
I'm
true?
fairly confident that's true, and I think it's because he's Australian, so his eligibility is a little bit weird. Like I think because he's 23 years old. Like I can't imagine he's going to be a true sophomore.
Right.
All right, I'll look into that and I'll bring it up on the next pod because I'm pretty sure he has 1 year of eligibility left, despite being a freshman All-American last year.
Huh. Interesting. That I cannot confirm nor deny that. But what I can confirm is that Johnny Dixon is a dude. I absolutely love watching him play. Like you said, probably not somebody who's going to go super high in the NFL draft, mostly just because of his size. He's not that big of a guy, but he is, he does not get enough credit for what he does for the Penn State defense. Not enough credit, not nearly enough as he should. The other thing to talk about here, and it's not necessarily Dixon related specifically, but just to talk about what it means for the cornerback room in general. Speaking of transfers, to go off on a tangent here, I am really surprised that we did not see, I was feeling pretty confident that we would see at least like maybe 2 transfers out of that cornerback room, or guys entering the portal at least, just because of the number of guys ahead of them and the fact that they brought in Storm Duck. But I think the fact that they are not speaks volumes to how guys feel about what can happen for their careers under the development of Terry Smith and Manny Diaz, of course, as well.
All right, 2 quick things. All right, Thompson, this is pure friend of the pod, Daniel Gowan. Thompson has 1 season of eligibility remaining. His clock started while he was still in Australia. So although he was a freshman last year, he has 1 season left. Then we're done talking about Aussie punters. But on that point on Terry Smith and trusting him, let's think back to the 2014 recruiting class where Penn State brought in a handful of corners who went on to play in the NFL. Grant Haley, Christian Campbell, and Amani Oruwariye. Haley and Campbell got in the field right away. Oruwariye had to take a red shirt and was patient. And Oruwariye has gone on to become the best pro of all of them. Like, Terry Smith has shown that if you trust his process, he will get you to that next level. And I think that's a really good example of that. I know a lot of these guys who are being recruited now aren't probably old enough to remember those days, but that's still a really big selling point, is that he has gotten guys to the NFL. He's going to have the first defensive back drafted in the first round in Penn State history. And he's a guy that it just seems like guys love to play for. And I think he's the most important hire Franklin maybe has ever made.
Yeah, we could be entering a true golden age of Penn State defensive backs, because Porter Jr. is almost certainly going to be a first rounder this year. Kalen King has a very good chance of being a first rounder next year. There's a ton of talent in that room behind them, so that train could really just be, getting going. Which is, as somebody who has been begging for years for Penn State to have a true lockdown type cornerback, to have gotten to see 3 on the team this past year was, I go back and tell my 2010, 2011, 2012 self that would be happening, and I would not believe you. So Dixon coming back, huge for this team. Very underrated, perhaps the most underrated one on this list to be returning, along with Devon Ellies, I would say. Yeah. Well, Matt, I think that does it. Those are all the guys that we could think of, at least, that were, guys that could have gone into the NFL and chose not to. At a later date, maybe we'll talk about guys that we thought maybe were portal candidates that decided to stay. Maybe when we kind of look at the roster at large and, go position by position, we'll probably do something like that closer to the spring game. But I think that's about it for today. Anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
No, portal window is going to close here in a little bit, so we'll have a good idea of who's going to be in for spring. Obviously, that doesn't really matter if you're a grad transfer. You can kind of come and go as you please. But I think we're coming up pretty quick on locking into the spring roster here. So crazy. It feels like the season just ended and we've got a long off season ahead of us, but I feel like we still have more to talk about. And I'm excited for the coming weeks here to talk about I think roster management has become the most interesting part of college football. I don't know why. I'm just fascinated by it. And I'm excited to talk a lot more of it with the gang here.
Yeah, the machine never stops. The machine that is college football. So, this is our a little 2 podcast week for us here. I haven't done that in a while, but we will be sure to, you can expect at least 1 podcast from us every week going forward for the off season. That is our stated goal this year, to keep things consistent for you. So if you're listening now, really appreciate it. Make sure you keep your eyes peeled to that feed, get alerts from when we post new ones, whatever that may be. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you listen. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube if you want to watch us there. And I think that about does it. Make sure you visit Homefield. Use that code RoarLionsRoar at checkout for 15% off of your first order. But I think that is going to do it tonight. For myself, Nick Pollock, for my co-host, Matt Filipovitz, thanks for listening to us here at Roar Lions Roar. Go State.